Yesterday you shoved my face into the pavement at a bus stop. Today I decide whether your actions served justice or destroyed it."
The gavel struck once. Silence rippled through the packed courtroom. Rows of spectators leaned forward in disbelief, their eyes darting between the judge on the bench and the two uniformed officers seated at the defense table. Officers Blake and Donovan froze, their mouths slightly open as though they had seen a ghost. Their knuckles tightened on the edge of the table. The same man they had handcuffed and humiliated less than 24 hours earlier now towered above them in a black robe, every eye in the room waiting for his judgment. They sat motionless, pale, stunned, exposed. The shock was complete. Judge Raymond Carter removed his glasses slowly, holding their gaze. His voice, calm yet heavy with unshakable authority, filled the chamber. "I know exactly who you are, and you will soon learn exactly who I am." The audience erupted in whispers, gasps echoing like distant thunder. How could this be? Just yesterday, he looked like nothing more than an ordinary janitor in worn shoes and a faded jacket, a man invisible to most of the world. Now he sat as the one person who could determine their fate. How could this happen? The answer wasn't in the courtroom. It was at a bus stop, 24 hours earlier, with two arrogant officers and a man whose secret was about to turn their entire world upside down. If you've ever believed that true justice can rise from the most overlooked places, stay with me. What unfolds in the next moments will leave you unable to look away. If you want more stories that remind us dignity can survive even in the darkest corners, take a second to subscribe. Your support helps these voices be heard and keeps stories like this alive for those who need them most. The gavel fell again. The trial was about to begin, and the question lingered in every mind. Was this a twist of fate, or the long-delayed arrival of justice? Raymond Carter was 48 years old, a shadow moving through the pre-dawn quiet of Philadelphia. His uniform, faded from years of bleach and hard work, made him blend into the city's backdrop. To the world, he was a janitor, nothing more. But beneath the tired exterior was a carefully guarded secret. A past life where he commanded courtrooms, his words precise as a surgeon's scalpel. A life he had buried after a betrayal left him shattered. A truth so deep even his daughter, Amira, only knew fragments. His morning ritual was a silent testament to what remained. Before leaving for his night shift, he always left a small paper bag on the kitchen counter for Amira. Inside, a sandwich, a banana, and a note. "Don't skip lunch. Love, Dad." She was 19, a bright college sophomore, and though she teased him about it, she never left the bag behind. It was his anchor, a quiet promise that while he had lost his voice in the world, he would never lose her. Tonight, as he worked, the door to courtroom 3B was slightly ajar. Raymond paused, his cart squeaking to a halt. He gazed at the empty judge's bench, a throne of dark wood under a single security light. For a fleeting moment, the janitor vanished. In his eyes flickered the reflection of another man, a lawyer, a fighter, a ghost. He quickly shook his head, pushing the cart forward. The past was a locked room. He finished his shift as the first hints of dawn touched the sky. He bought a loaf of bread from the corner store, the cashier barely acknowledging him. He was a man trained to observe, to see details others missed, but no one ever bothered to see him. He was fine with that. Invisibility was a kind of peace. Until the bus stop. Until the moment his carefully constructed silence was about to be shattered by the very system he once served. As he walked toward the shelter, the loaf of bread tucked under his arm, he didn't know that his two worlds were about to collide with the force of an explosion. The streetlight at the bus stop flickered, casting erratic shadows. Raymond stood with the loaf of bread under his arm, a lone figure in the encroaching dawn. A police cruiser slid to the curb, its headlights pinning him in their glare. Officers Blake and Donovan emerged, their movements sharp and predatory. Blake was built like a bulldog. Donovan was leaner, but his eyes held a restless aggression. "Hey, you. Got a name?" Blake's voice was a low growl. "Or you just like wandering around at night?" Raymond's posture remained relaxed, but his senses were on high alert. "I'm waiting for the 52 bus, officer. My name is Raymond Carter." Donovan circled him slowly. "You fit the description of a suspect. Robbery last week." Raymond met his gaze. "And what description would that be?" Blake's patience snapped. He jabbed a finger at Raymond. "ID. Now, stop playing games." "I'm reaching for my wallet," Raymond said, his voice even, his hands moving with deliberate slowness. But it was too late. Blake lunged, grabbing Raymond's arm and twisting it behind his back. The loaf of bread fell to the pavement with a soft thud. With a grunt, Blake slammed him against the glass of the bus shelter, the impact rattling the frame. "Stop resisting," he yelled, though Raymond offered no resistance at all. Across the street, Lena Morales, a 16-year-old student on her way to an early class, saw the scene unfold. Her heart pounded, but her instincts took over. She raised her phone, the screen glowing in the dark, and pressed record. Donovan snapped the cuffs on Raymond's wrists, the cold steel biting into his skin. "He's not doing anything." Lena's voice, though trembling, cut through the air. "Stay back, kid," Donovan barked without looking at her. "This is police business." Blake shoved Raymond toward the cruiser, forcing his head down. Through the blur, Raymond saw the small, determined figure of the girl across the street, her phone held high like a torch. A silent witness. The car door slammed shut, sealing him in darkness. As the cruiser sped away, the loaf of bread lay abandoned on the sidewalk. Lena lowered her phone, her eyes fixed on the screen, on the face of the man staring back at her through the pixels. She took a deep breath, her finger hovering over the screen. She hit share. A single tap, and the storm was unleashed. The ride to the station felt longer than it was. The cruiser rattled over potholes, each bump driving the cuffs deeper into Raymond's wrists. Blake and Donovan spoke in the front seat as if he weren't there at all. "Another one claiming to be somebody," Blake muttered, smirking into the rearview mirror. "Yeah," Donovan replied. "Last week some guy swore he was the mayor's nephew. They all think a story's gonna save them." Raymond stayed silent. He had once defended men who tried to argue with officers like these, only to watch their words twisted and dismissed. Tonight, he would not waste his breath. When the cruiser pulled behind the squat brick station, Donovan yanked open the back door. "Out!" His tone was clipped, mechanical. Raymond stepped onto the cracked pavement, his back straight despite the cuffs cutting into him. Inside, the booking area reeked of stale coffee and disinfectant. A sergeant sat behind the desk, heavyset, balding, his expression bored. Blake shoved Raymond forward. "Picked him up loitering at the bus stop. Matches the description from last week's robbery. Claims he's a judge." That last part drew laughter from two other officers filling out paperwork nearby. "A judge? In that jacket?" One snorted. "Sure, and I'm the president." At that moment, a young officer, Malik Turner, walked past carrying a tray of coffee. Hearing Blake's words, he startled, and a cup clattered to the floor, splashing coffee across the tiles. "Sorry, Sarge," Malik mumbled, quickly kneeling to clean up the mess. But as he did, his wide, astonished eyes darted toward Raymond for a fraction of a second before he scrambled away down a hallway. No one else seemed to notice the look of recognition. The sergeant barely looked up. "Name?" "Raymond Carter," he said, steady. "Occupation?" the sergeant asked, not bothering to glance at him. "Janitor," Blake answered for him, grinning. "At least, that's what his ID will say when we check, unless he's carrying one of those fake judge cards." More laughter. Raymond's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I'll make my phone call. That will clear everything up." The sergeant smirked. Yeah, after processing," he gestured. "Empty his pockets." Still cuffed, Raymond said evenly, I can't while restrained. Remove the cuffs first. Blake shoved him toward the counter. Listen to him. He thinks he's running the show. With a snap, Donovan unlocked the cuffs. Relief in his wrists was short-lived. Humiliation still pressed on him like weight he couldn't shake. He emptied his pockets, wallet, keys, a folded hospital parking receipt, a pack of mints. The sergeant flipped through the wallet, pausing at the judicial ID card embossed with the state seal. He gave it a cursory glance, then tossed it aside. "Nice prop," he muttered. For the first time, a flicker of something cold and hard surfaced in Raymond's gaze. "Shoes and belt," the sergeant barked. Raymond complied, standing in his socks on the icy floor. Blake leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. "You know what I see when I look at you? Not a judge, not even a janitor. Out here you're nothing." Raymond didn't flinch. He met Blake's eyes and held his stare, a silent challenge that unsettled the officer more than any shouted threat could. Donovan shifted uncomfortably. "Just sign him in, Blake." The sergeant's fingers tapped away at the keyboard, the sound echoing in the tense room like a ticking clock. To the officers, this was routine. Another number logged, another shift closer to ending. They saw a man being processed. Raymond saw the pieces falling into place. He straightened his shoulders, refusing to bow. Humiliation was a weight, but resolve was a fire. The night was far from over. And though they didn't know it, their biggest mistake wasn't the arrest. It was underestimating the man they had just made invisible. The video hit the internet before midnight. Lena Morales uploaded it from her dorm room, hands still trembling as she typed the caption. This man was just waiting for the bus. Within minutes, her post was shared, retweeted, stitched. By dawn, the clip was everywhere, on Facebook feeds of church groups, on Instagram reels, on TikTok loops set to angry music. The footage was raw, shaky, but undeniable. Blake's voice barked through the speakers. "Stop resisting." The camera caught Raymond's calm reply. "I'm not resisting. This is a mistake." The loaf of bread tumbling to the ground, the cuffs biting into his wrists. Blake's cold laugh when Raymond told them his name. At first, the comments flooded in from strangers. Typical. This happens every day. Another black man harassed for existing. But then, one detail caught fire. In the corner of the video, as Blake sneered, Raymond's wallet fell open. A card slipped into the frame. Official seal glinting under the streetlight. Viewers froze the image, zoomed in, enhanced. Wait, is that a judge's ID? The thread exploded. By morning, hashtags were trending. #, judge at the bus stop. Not just a janitor. News anchors scrambled. One local channel replayed the clip on a loop while a stern legal analyst said, "If this man is who people claim, then these officers may have just arrested a sitting judicial officer. That carries enormous consequences." At the courthouse cafeteria, clerks whispered, eyes darting at their phones. "That's Carter, isn't it?" "The janitor? I thought he was just cleaning the halls." Another clerk shook her head, lowering her voice. "My cousin said he's pro tem, fills in as judge sometimes, but he never talks about it." The storm only grew louder. A janitor, cuffed like a criminal, who just might also hold the gavel of justice. The contradiction ignited outrage, confusion, fascination. To the public, the story wasn't just about profiling anymore. It was about identity, invisibility, and the masks people wear. Amira Carter sat frozen in her dorm common room, phone buzzing non-stop. Her classmates stared at her as the clip played on the big screen TV. Someone whispered, "Isn't that your dad?" She didn't answer. When she got home that evening, the apartment lights were low. Raymond sat at the small kitchen table, hands folded, a cup of tea untouched in front of him. The loaf of bread from the night before rested on the counter, still in its torn bag. "Dad," Amira said, voice sharp with confusion and fear, What is this? Everyone's talking. They're saying you're—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Are you really a judge?" Raymond looked at her, the weight of years behind his eyes. He didn't rush to answer. Silence stretched, heavy but calm. Finally, he said only, "Tomorrow, you'll understand." "That's not enough," she snapped, tears brimming. "You've kept secrets from me my whole life. I thought you were just— Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Raymond's gaze softened, but his words were firm. "Because some truths only make sense when the time is right." He stood, walked past her, and placed the torn paper bag on the counter. "Eat something," he said quietly. "You'll need your strength." Amira stared after him, trembling with questions. But Raymond offered none. His silence was both shield and sword. Meanwhile, the city roared. Talk radio hosts debated whether the officers should be suspended immediately. Community leaders called emergency press conferences. Protesters gathered at the bus stop where the arrest had happened, holding signs. "Justice for Carter." "End racial profiling." Blake and Donovan, oblivious to the online explosion, swaggered through the station, trading jokes about their arrest of the week. But when they checked their phones, the laughter died. Their names were trending. Their faces were frozen on screen beside words like abuse of power and systemic racism. Blake cursed. "They're blowing this out of proportion." Donovan's jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter. This is bad. Real bad." By midnight, national outlets had picked up the story. Commentators debated whether Raymond Carter was a symbol of systemic injustice or simply one man caught in a tragic mistake. But one thing was certain. Tomorrow, the world would be watching. Raymond knew it, too. As he sat in his small office, light from a single lamp casting long shadows, he read the news scrolling across his laptop. His face remained unreadable, but his hands, resting on the keys, curled into slow, deliberate fists. The storm had arrived, and for the first time in years, he would not be invisible. The blue light of the laptop screen cast long shadows across Raymond's face. The quiet was broken when Amira stepped into his small office. In her hands was a dusty cardboard box, a relic from the attic she placed on his desk. "I found this," she said, her voice firm. "What happened, Dad?" Her fingers rested on a yellowed newspaper headline. "Promising attorney Raymond Carter under investigation." Raymond looked at the article, and a weary sigh escaped him. His gaze drifted to a faded photograph in the box of him standing proudly beside a teenage client named Daryl Owens. "That," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of memory, "was my greatest failure." As Amira looked at the photo, the scene dissolved into the past. A younger Raymond, full of fire and confidence, argued passionately in a bright courtroom. He believed in the truth. He believed the system would protect an innocent kid like Daryl. But the memory quickly soured. A flashback showed the ambitious prosecutor, Carl Benton, calling a surprise witness. Raymond shot to his feet, objecting, but Judge Sanderson, with a cold, dismissive wave of his hand, silenced him. The camera focused on Sanderson's faint, cruel smirk as he overruled every attempt Raymond made to expose the witness's lies. The memory ended with the devastating slam of the gavel, the guilty verdict, and the sound of a mother's heartbroken sobs. The scene returned to the present. Amira was staring at him, waiting for the rest of the story. "They didn't just rig the trial," Raymond continued, his voice low and laced with old pain. "They had to make sure I could never fight back." He gestured to the newspaper clipping. "They planted a fake tip, said I tampered with evidence. The charges were dropped, but my name was poison. I had failed him, Amira." His voice cracked slightly. "I failed because I was naive enough to think the game wasn't fixed from the start." "So you just gave up?" she whispered, her own eyes filling with tears. He shook his head, walking to the window and staring out at the dark city. "I stepped away," he corrected her gently. "I chose a life where things were simple." honest. He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw the profound depth of his disillusionment. Floors don't lie. Trash cans don't scheme. He closed the lid on the cardboard box as if closing a door to the past, and as he stood there, the silence in the room was heavy with all the years of secrets he had kept to protect both her and himself. The night after unpacking the box of memories, Raymond sat alone in his kitchen. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the box of clippings still resting on the table. His phone buzzed with a number he hadn't seen in years. "Ray, it's Harold Whitaker." The voice was warm, steady, familiar. Once Harold had been a colleague in the courtroom. Now he was the newly appointed chief judge of the county. "I know you don't take calls like this anymore, but hear me out." Raymond almost hung up. The last time he had trusted the system, it destroyed him. But Harold spoke quickly, almost urgently. "You've lived in the shadows long enough. We have a list: judges pro tem, experienced lawyers, men and women with integrity, who step in when the courts are overwhelmed or a judge is out sick. It's not permanent. It's not politics. It's service." Raymond's brow furrowed. "Service?" "Yes," Harold pressed. "You'd be called maybe 2, 3 times a year. One docket, one day, but you'd have full authority on the bench. And Ray, we need you. The system chewed you up, but you still believe in justice. That makes you dangerous. In the best way." Raymond let the silence hang. He remembered the bitter taste of betrayal, the sound of a gavel slamming against truth. He thought of Darrell Owens, the boy lost to a corrupted verdict. "I'm not sure I belong in that world anymore," he admitted. "Exactly why you do," Harold said. His voice softened. "You always wanted to clean the rot out of the system. You've been doing that your whole life now, just with mops and buckets instead of motions and appeals. This is the same work, Ray, just a different tool." The words hit harder than Harold knew. Floors don't lie. Trash cans don't scheme. Raymond had told himself that for years. But maybe, just maybe, the law could be scrubbed too, if the right hands held the broom. Finally, he exhaled. "I'll sign the list, but only if you promise me one thing." "What's that?" "That you won't call me unless you truly have no other choice." Harold chuckled. "Deal. And Ray, thank you. This isn't just about cases, it's about conscience." The call ended, but the echo remained. A judge pro tem, temporary, invisible until summoned. A role hidden in plain sight, much like the man himself. Raymond poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, staring at the steam curling upward. He wasn't returning to politics. He wasn't chasing redemption. He was making a quiet promise, one only he and Harold understood. A promise that if fate ever handed him a chance, he would answer, not for glory, but for the justice stolen from him years ago. He didn't know it then, but that promise would soon collide with the night at the bus stop, and when it did, the system that once buried him would have no idea who they were up against. Judge Alan Sanderson's study was dark, the only light coming from the TV screen. Lena Morales' viral video played on a loop, Raymond Carter being shoved into a police cruiser. Sanderson's hand tightened around his glass of whiskey. The public was a mob, baying for blood, and the 2 officers at the center of that storm, his officers, Blake and Donovan, were scheduled to appear in his courtroom tomorrow. The Benson case. Excessive force. Video evidence. It was a political minefield. Rule against them, and they talk, he thought, swirling the amber liquid. Rule for them, and the whole city burns. Either way, the fire would reach him. Blake and Donovan were his tools, his blunt instruments for years. He couldn't afford for them to turn on him. He couldn't afford the scrutiny. He watched the clip again, a flicker of recognition in his eyes as he saw Raymond's face. Just some janitor. But the pressure was too much. "Not me," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "Not this one." He set the glass down with a decisive clink. At 6 a.m., his call to the courthouse administrator was a performance of theatrical agony. "Food poisoning," he rasped into the phone. "Terrible night. There's no way I can sit the bench today." "Understood, Judge," the administrator replied, already scrolling down the emergency roster on her computer. "We'll find a pro tem to cover." Sanderson hung up, a slow smile of relief spreading across his face. He had dodged the bullet. Some poor substitute would take the heat, and by the time the dust settled, his name would be clear. He leaned back in his leather chair, convinced he had outsmarted them all. But fate, and the court's rotation list, had a different plan. The administrator's finger stopped on the next available name. Raymond Carter. A forgotten name. But his record was clean, his availability confirmed. The call was made without a second thought. In his small apartment, Raymond answered the phone. He listened, his face unreadable. "Mr. Carter, we need you in courtroom 4B at 10 sharp. Judge Sanderson is unavailable." A long silence stretched across the line. The very man who had destroyed his career had just, in an act of self-preservation, handed him the gavel. Sanderson thought he was escaping the fire. He had no idea he'd just invited it into his own house, and by the time he learned who was sitting on his bench, it would be far too late. The heavy wooden doors of courtroom 4B swung open. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. "All rise." And then he appeared, not in a janitor's uniform but in a black robe that settled on his shoulders like armor. Raymond Carter walked to the bench, his steps steady, his face an unreadable mask of authority. At the defense table, Blake and Donovan froze. The color drained from Donovan's face. Blake's jaw went slack. The man they had humiliated last night now towered above them, holding the power of the law in his hands. "Be seated," Raymond said. The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a gavel strike. A wave of whispers crashed through the gallery. At the defense table, the union attorney, Maxwell Green, leaned forward, his confusion turning to alarm. Raymond's eyes found Blake and Donovan, holding their gaze just long enough to shatter their composure. "Good morning," he began, his tone clipped and cold. "This court is now in session in the matter of Benson versus Officers Blake and Donovan." Green shot to his feet. "Your Honor, in light of the events of last night which are now public knowledge, we must formally request your recusal. The appearance of bias is undeniable." Raymond nodded, unflinching. "Your objection is noted, counsel." He then turned to the public defender, Gabriela Rivera. "Ms. Rivera?" Rivera stood. "We oppose, Your Honor. What happened to you is not bias. It's context. It speaks to a pattern of conduct, which is the very heart of this case." The air in the room was electric. Green sputtered, ready to argue, but Raymond raised a hand, silencing him. He let the tension hang for a moment, his eyes sweeping over the two officers who refused to look at him. "The motion for recusal," he said, his voice low but cracking through the silence, "is denied." Donovan's head dropped into his hands. Blake cursed under his breath. "This is unprecedented," Green exclaimed. "It is lawful," Raymond countered, his eyes locking onto the attorney with cold fire. "And it is final." "We will proceed." He leaned forward, his gaze returning to the two men at the table. They were trapped. The man they had dismissed as invisible, the man they had stripped of his dignity, now held their entire world in his hands. The storm had just made landfall inside the courtroom. The bailiff called the first witness. "Tariq Benson, please take the stand." A young black man rose nervously from the gallery. He was no older than 25, dressed in a pressed shirt and borrowed tie. His eyes flicked to Raymond as if seeking assurance. Raymond gave him a single nod, steady, measured, enough to ground him. Once sworn in, Tariq folded his hands in front of him, his knuckles white against the wood of the witness stand. "Mr. Benson," said Gabriela Rivera, his public defender, "tell the court what happened the night you encountered Officers Blake and Donovan." Tariq drew in a shaky breath. It was March 14th. I had just finished my night shift at the hospital. I'm a nursing assistant. It was late, around 11:30, when I noticed a patrol car following me. His voice was tight, clipped, but every word carried weight. They tailed me for 5 blocks before turning on their lights. I wasn't speeding. My taillight wasn't out. Nothing. But they pulled me over anyway. At the defense table, Blake shifted in his seat. Donovan avoided looking up. "What happened after they stopped you?" Rivera pressed. "They asked where I was coming from, where I was going. I told them I was headed home. They said I was being difficult." Tariq swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Then they ordered me out of the car. Said they smelled marijuana." He paused, shaking his head. "I don't use drugs. I told them they could search the car, but I wanted to know why I'd been stopped first." "And then?" Rivera asked. "Officer Reynolds grabbed me." Tariq stopped, corrected himself quickly. "Sorry. Officer Donovan. He pulled me out of the car, pushed me against the hood. Officer Blake cuffed me while shouting I was resisting. I wasn't. I wasn't fighting them. At all." The gallery murmured, a ripple of recognition moving through the crowd. The description was too familiar. "And after you were handcuffed?" "They searched my car, found nothing, but they still hauled me in, said I was obstructing, resisting arrest. I spent the night in a cell for no reason." His voice cracked on the last words, but he sat tall, refusing to fold under the weight of the memory. Rivera stepped back, her job done. No further questions. Maxwell Green, the union attorney, rose smoothly. "Mr. Benson, are you aware there have been a series of robberies in your neighborhood recently?" "Yes." "And would you agree you match the general description of suspects often reported in those incidents? Young, male, medium build, wearing a hoodie?" Tariq bristled. "A hoodie is not a crime." Green smiled thinly. "Perhaps not, but the officers must make split-second judgments, must they not?" Tariq stared at him, unblinking. "Split-second? They followed me for 5 blocks before pulling me over. They had time." The courtroom rustled. Even Raymond's gavel wasn't needed. The silence that followed was heavy enough. Green tried again. "Isn't it true you raised your voice at the officers?" "No," Tariq answered flatly. "The only time my voice rose was when they twisted my arm and I said, 'That hurts.'" A faint flush crept up Green's neck. He shuffled his papers but found nothing useful. No further questions. Raymond leaned forward slightly, his eyes on Tariq. "Mr. Benson, one final question. During this encounter, how did you feel?" Tariq's composure cracked, just a little. His voice dropped. "Invisible. Like nothing I said mattered. Like I wasn't a person. Just a suspect who fit some story they already decided on." A stillness swept the room. Blake's jaw clenched. Donovan's hands fidgeted. Raymond let the silence linger. Every second another nail hammered into the coffin of denial. "You may step down," Raymond said quietly. As Tariq returned to his seat, the echo of his testimony hung in the air. For the first time, the courtroom saw not just one case, but a pattern. Tariq's story was a mirror of Raymond's own humiliation. 2 nights, 2 men, the same script, and now, with Tariq's words entered into the record, the storm gathering around Blake and Donovan was no longer just about Raymond Carter. It was about every man who had ever been pulled from his car, every voice dismissed as nothing. "Your Honor," Rivera said, rising from her chair, "we have additional evidence." All eyes followed her as she carried a laptop to the projector. One click, and the courtroom lights dimmed slightly. On the screen, Lena Morales' video lit up, shaky but clear. Blake and Donovan forcing Raymond face down at the bus stop, their hands pressing him against cold concrete while he calmly repeated, "I'm not resisting." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some stood, craning their necks to see better. The viral clip everyone had seen on their phones was now official evidence, burning itself into the record. Blake's face hardened into stone, jaw locked. Donovan, though, shifted in his chair. He watched his own image on the screen, watched himself pinning Raymond down, and his eyes flickered, unsettled. On the video, a woman's voice shouted, "He's just waiting for the bus." The angle caught Donovan glancing at her, then back to Raymond. It was undeniable. Their victim was neither a suspect nor a threat, just a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rivera turned to the judge. This video shows not only excessive force, but disregard for identity. Mr. Carter told them who he was. They dismissed it, because in their eyes, his word meant nothing. Raymond's gaze swept over the defense table. Donovan looked away. Green stood quickly, trying to regain control. This video is incomplete. It doesn't show what led up to the detention. But even he sounded hollow, his arguments collapsing under the weight of the moving images. The clip ended. Silence fell like a hammer. Raymond finally broke it. Motion noted. The video will remain admitted. A whisper of shock pulsed through the crowd. At the defense table, Blake leaned toward Donovan, hissing under his breath. "Keep it together. Don't show weakness." Donovan didn't answer. His hands were clasped tight, knuckles pale. In his mind, the courtroom noise faded. He saw his wife's face, the way she had looked at him that morning when he left the house. He heard his little boy asking why kids at school called his daddy a bad cop. Those words had cut deeper than anything shouted by protesters. Blake jabbed his elbow. "Focus." Donovan finally whispered back, his voice cracking. "We went too far." Blake's glare was lethal. "Shut up. Say nothing." But the damage was done. Donovan's silence was no longer loyalty. It was doubt. The seeds were planted, and everyone watching could see it in the slump of his shoulders, the way his eyes avoided the screen still frozen on Raymond's restrained body. Rivera seized the moment. "Pattern. That's what this is. Tariq Benson's story, this video, they're not isolated. They're the same playbook." The jury of public opinion in the gallery buzzed again, the sound of realization spreading like wildfire. Raymond leaned forward. "Order." His voice cut through the noise, restoring silence. Then he fixed his eyes directly on Donovan. For a split second, it wasn't the black robe that spoke, but the man who had been on that pavement. "You saw it, too," his gaze seemed to say. Donovan swallowed hard, his body betraying him. The mask of unity with Blake was cracking. The segment ended not with an outburst, but with tension thick as glass about to shatter. Blake still looked defiant. Donovan, for the first time, looked human. And everyone in that courtroom understood. The wall of silence between those two officers would not hold for long. "Your Honor," Rivera said, standing with quiet gravity. "The complainant calls Officer Malik Turner." A stir ran through the courtroom. A uniformed officer testifying against his own department? That was rare enough to be historic. Malik walked forward, his steps deliberate but his face tight with nerves. He took the oath, his right hand trembling slightly. Raymond studied him. He remembered the flash of recognition at the station, the spilled coffee. Now, the young officer was stepping into a storm. Rivera approached. "Officer Turner, how long have you been with the Abington Township Police Department?" 14 months, Malik answered, voice steady but low. "And in that time, what kind of training and instruction have you received about conducting stops?" Malik hesitated. He glanced toward the defense table where Blake glared at him, eyes burning. Donovan looked down, unwilling to meet his gaze. Malik took a breath. "Officially, we were trained in constitutional law, reasonable suspicion, probable cause, all the right words." "And unofficially?" Rivera pressed. The room leaned forward. Malik's next words dropped like stones into water. "Unofficially, rookies are told that certain things are enough. A hoodie, a nice car in the wrong neighborhood, a nervous look. If you write furtive movements in your report, no one questions it. A wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. Blake shot to his feet. Objection. This is hearsay and opinion. Raymond's gavel came down hard. Overruled. The witness is testifying to his direct training experience. Continue. Malik's voice grew firmer. We were told some neighborhoods were good hunting grounds. South Side, East Side, mostly Black and Latino areas. We were told to be proactive there. And when we brought in numbers, stops, arrests, we were praised. Evaluations went up. Promotions came faster for the ones with the most activity. Donovan shifted again, his face twisting. Blake muttered curses under his breath, fists clenched. Rivera kept her questions sharp. Were Officers Blake and Donovan considered productive by those standards? Yes, Malik said. They were the examples. Command told us, watch how they work. That's how you get results. The words landed like thunder. The very men on trial weren't outliers. They were role models within the department. The gallery buzzed louder. Reporters scribbled furiously. A community activist in the back wiped at her eyes, whispering, I knew it. Rivera pressed harder. And after Mr. Carter was brought into the station last night? Malik's jaw tightened. His voice shook, but he forced it out. I heard Captain Preston tell everyone involved to get the story straight. Dispatch was told to adjust the call log, to make it look like a suspicious person report came in. But it didn't. A collective gasp hit the room. Raymond leaned forward, his face carved from stone. You're saying there was an attempt to falsify records? Yes, Your Honor. Malik met his gaze, courage blazing now. I saw it with my own eyes. I heard it with my own ears. Green slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. Your Honor, the credibility of this witness— Raymond cut him off, voice like iron. Counselor, sit down. For the first time, the union attorney obeyed without argument. Malik drew a breath, his shoulders straightening. I joined this job to protect people, but I can't stand here under oath and pretend this system isn't broken. We're trained to look at men like Mr. Carter and Mr. Benson not as citizens, but as suspects first. That's not justice, that's targeting. The room erupted, gasps, angry shouts, applause quickly hushed by the bailiff. Raymond struck his gavel. Order! But even as he restored silence, the impact was irreversible. The case was no longer about one man's complaint or one night's arrest. Malik Turner had dragged the entire department into the light, exposing the quiet machinery of quotas, coded language, and cover-ups. Blake's mask cracked, sweat beaded his forehead. Donovan sat frozen, his conflict growing unbearable. And in the gallery, every witness, every journalist, every citizen knew the trial had just transformed into something far bigger. The lunch recess arrived like a fragile pause in a storm. The gallery emptied into the hallways, buzzing with Malik Turner's explosive testimony. Inside a side room reserved for defense counsel, Blake and Donovan sat across from each other, the air heavy with silence. Their attorney, Maxwell Green, paced, shuffling papers that no longer held the weight they once did. Donovan broke first. This is falling apart, Blake. His voice was low, urgent. Turner just buried us. He put Preston in it, too. We can't fight that. Blake's head snapped up, eyes blazing. You shut your mouth. He's a rookie, a coward. The union will tear him apart on cross. Donovan leaned forward, fists pressed to the table. And what if they don't? What if the jury of public opinion already convicted us? My wife hasn't stopped calling. My little girl saw that video online. She asked if Daddy was the bad guy. You know what that does to a man? Blake slammed his hand on the table so hard the coffee cups rattled. Don't start with that family, man. Crap now. We're in this together. We've always been in this together. Green tried to cut in, his voice tense. Gentlemen, arguing won't help. We need to stay united. But Donovan's eyes had already shifted. United got us here. United means covering every quota stop, Every false report. United means I lose everything while you sit there pretending it'll blow over like every other time. Blake shoved his chair back, standing, towering over his partner. You think you're walking away from this clean? You talk, you're finished. The union will eat you alive. You'll never work a beat again. Donovan shot to his feet too, their faces inches apart. His voice cracked under the weight of desperation. Maybe I don't want to work a beat again. Maybe I want my daughter to grow up with a father who isn't hiding behind lies. The room froze. Even Green stopped pacing. Blake's expression twisted with disbelief. You're really thinking about flipping? After all we've done? After everything we covered for each other? Donovan's hands shook, but his voice was steady now. I'm done covering. I'm done watching men like Benson, like Carter, get chewed up while we laugh it off. I can't carry this anymore, Blake. Not when my family pays the price. Blake's laugh was harsh, bitter. You sound just like them, like Carter on that bench, staring down at us like we're dirt. You want to crawl to him for mercy? You think he'll spare you? Donovan's jaw tightened. I don't care about mercy. I care about truth. For a long moment, they stood locked in silence, two men who had once been brothers in arms, now staring at the fracture between them. Green finally spoke, his voice sharp. Sit down, both of you. Donovan, don't say another word without me present. And Blake, stop threatening your partner. This case is already toxic enough. Reluctantly, they sat, though the divide remained carved deep. Donovan's eyes were glassy, the weight of his decision heavy but resolute. Blake seethed, fists clenched so tight his knuckles whitened. When the bailiff's knock came to summon them back to court, Donovan rose slowly, adjusting his tie with shaking hands. He didn't look at Blake. Blake, for the first time, looked like a man who realized he might be standing alone. The storm inside the courtroom was about to grow even darker, because the wall of silence between partners had cracked, and once the first fissure shows, the whole structure threatens to collapse. The courthouse plaza was a battlefield long before the gavel struck inside. Amira Carter stood at the base of the wide stone steps, a megaphone clutched tightly in her hands. Beside her, Lena Morales adjusted the strap of her camera, scanning the swelling crowd with sharp, restless eyes. Justice for Benson! Justice for Carter! The chant rose, raw and urgent. College students, neighborhood residents, and activists filled the space, their handmade signs catching the sunlight. Some bore Tariq Benson's name, others carried screenshots of Raymond in handcuffs, frozen from Lena's viral video. But across the plaza, another group was gathering, louder by the minute. Blue Lives Matter flags whipped in the wind. Off-duty officers in matching T-shirts clustered together, their voices mocking. Support the badge! Stop demonizing heroes! The clash was inevitable. Amira's heart pounded, but she raised the megaphone anyway. We are not here to destroy, she called, her voice trembling but growing stronger. We are here to demand fairness, to demand accountability. A burly man in the opposing group cupped his hands and shouted back, Your father's a fraud. He's no judge. He's a janitor. He doesn't belong on that bench. Lena's camera swung toward the heckler, catching every word. She didn't flinch. Her lens had already been the sword that pierced the first lie. Smile for the internet, she muttered, red light blinking as she filmed. The tension thickened. Police officers on crowd control shifted nervously, forming a shaky line between the two groups. The air vibrated with chants colliding like waves against each other. Amira felt her throat tighten. She had spent years resenting her father's secrecy, years thinking he chose obscurity. But now she saw how the world treated men like him. And suddenly, her voice refused to break. My father taught me floors don't lie, she shouted, gripping the megaphone like a lifeline. But people do. The system does. Today, he stands where the truth can't be ignored. The crowd roared back, energy surging. For a brief second, she felt taller than the courthouse itself. Then it happened. A plastic bottle arced through the air, hurled from the pro-police crowd. It burst at Amira's feet, water splashing across her jeans. Gasps rippled through her supporters. The officers at the barricade moved too slowly. Another object, a crumpled signpost, sailed over, this one striking a student protester in the shoulder. Chaos erupted. Lena darted forward, planting herself between the barricade and the angry officers' supporters, her camera raised like a shield. "You throw another thing," she snapped, "and the whole country sees your face tonight." The aggressors hesitated, realizing every second was being recorded from multiple angles. The students rallied, chanting louder, drowning out the jeers with sheer volume. Amira's chest heaved, adrenaline surging. She looked out at the sea of faces, some afraid, some defiant, and realized this wasn't just about her father anymore. This was about every black man, every silenced woman, every kid like Tariq who had been told to bow their head and accept injustice. She lifted the megaphone again, her voice breaking through the din. "We don't fight with fists. We fight with truth. We fight with unity. They want us scared, but look around. We are more than they ever expected." The chants returned with renewed fury. "Justice now! Justice now!" One officer from the crowd control line, a young Latina with her cap pulled low, leaned toward Amira as she passed near the barricade. "Keep your people calm," she murmured urgently. "They're looking for an excuse." Amira met her eyes, seeing the flicker of sympathy there. She nodded tightly, then turned back to her supporters. "Stay strong, stay peaceful," she shouted. "Don't give them the excuse they want." Lena lowered her camera for a moment, eyes meeting Amira's. "They can't silence both the inside and the outside," she said. "Your father's fighting in there. We're fighting out here." Amira's hands trembled, but her spine straightened. Together, she and Lena climbed onto a low ledge at the foot of the courthouse steps. Side by side, they raised their voices over the storm, their words echoing against the marble columns. Inside, the trial was tearing open the system. Outside, the streets were becoming a second courtroom, one where the jury was the people, and the verdict would not be ignored. And in that electric moment, both sides of the battle, inside and out, burned with the same truth. The storm was no longer containable. While the courtroom thundered with testimony, another storm gathered outside its walls. On the courthouse steps, Amira Carter stood shoulder to shoulder with Lena Morales, her phone buzzing non-stop with messages. Lena's video had already crossed 1 million views, spawning hashtags that lit up social media feeds across the city. Now, a crowd swelled around them. Students, neighbors, community activists, holding handmade signs that read, "Justice for Benson" and "We stand with Carter." Amira adjusted her backpack, her voice steady but urgent as she spoke into a borrowed megaphone. "This isn't just about one case. This is about every stop, every humiliation, every life disrupted because someone matched a description. Today, we show them we're watching, and we won't be silent." Cheers erupted. Cameras from local news stations zoomed in, capturing the young woman whose father's quiet dignity had already inspired thousands online. Lena stood just behind her, live-streaming every moment, her commentary sharp and fearless. "History is happening right here," she told her audience. "And it's not just in the courtroom. It's in the streets where truth meets resistance." But not everyone in the crowd was there to support. Across the street, a group of counter-protesters gathered, waving blue and black flags and shouting back with chants of "Back the Blue." Their voices rose in defiance, hurling insults toward Amira and the growing student coalition. One man in a baseball cap stepped forward, shouting over the chants, "Your dad's a fraud. He's no judge. He's a janitor who got lucky." Amira's grip tightened on the megaphone. For a moment, her face betrayed the sting of those words, but she steadied herself, drawing in a breath. "You call him a janitor like it's an insult," she fired back. "But let me tell you something. He's worked harder, lived truer, and stood taller than any of you hiding behind your flags. And tomorrow, you'll see just how wrong you are." The crowd behind her roared, drowning out the jeers. Still, tension escalated. 2 counter-protesters tried to push closer, but student volunteers formed a human wall. Lena kept recording, her camera catching every shove, every shouted slur. "Stay peaceful," she yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. "They want to fight. Don't give it to them." Police officers stationed nearby watched with unreadable expressions, some shifting uneasily as the 2 sides pressed against invisible lines of restraint. The scene outside mirrored the fracture inside the courtroom. Truth on one side, denial on the other, and the entire city watching. Amira spotted a group of high school students arriving with hastily made posters, one of them holding up a cardboard sign scrawled in black marker. "Floors don't lie." She felt her throat tighten, her father's words, reborn as a rallying cry. "This is bigger than us," she whispered to Lena, who nodded, her phone still streaming. "Then let's make it count," Lena replied. Reporters swarmed, asking questions. "Amira, what do you think your father will do? What if the union demands his removal?" Amira lifted her chin. "My father has faced worse than their threats. He doesn't run. He stands." The crowd picked up the words, chanting them back. "He stands! He stands!" The phrase rolled like thunder through the plaza, echoing off the courthouse walls. Across the street, the counter-protesters shouted louder, but their chants were now drowned by the swelling chorus of students, families, and neighbors. The clash of voices filled the air, a battle of narratives unfolding in real time. And though Amira's hands trembled slightly as she lowered the megaphone, her eyes were steady. She could feel the momentum shifting, the power of voices rising together. Inside, her father fought with law and evidence. Out here, she and Lena fought with truth and solidarity. The storm outside had matched the storm within, and both were closing in on Blake and Donovan, leaving them with nowhere left to hide. The courtroom was thick with tension when Maxwell Green stepped aside and another figure rose from the defense bench. Gordon Hale, the union's star litigator, polished, silver-haired, with a reputation for ambush tactics. He carried a sleek tablet under his arm like a weapon. "Your Honor," Gordon began smoothly, "before this court rushes to judgment, we must confront evidence that speaks directly to your impartiality." Raymond's expression didn't flicker. "Proceed." Gordon tapped the tablet. The speakers crackled and a recording filled the room. Raymond's voice, sharp, cutting. "Cops are all corrupt. They hide behind badges to crush the powerless." Gasps shot through the gallery. Green folded his arms, smirking. Blake leaned back in his chair with the ghost of a grin. Donovan stared at the table, pale. The recording continued, snippets strung together. "Every officer is guilty. They deserve no respect from the law." Gordon paused dramatically, letting the words hang in the air. "This is the voice of the man presiding over this case, the same man my clients arrested. How can anyone claim impartiality when he clearly harbors such venom toward law enforcement?" Whispers exploded. Reporters typed furiously. For a moment, even Rivera looked shaken. Raymond leaned forward, hands clasped. His voice was calm but carried steel. "Where did you obtain this?" "A concerned citizen," Gordon said smoothly. "One who believed the truth should not be buried." Raymond's eyes narrowed. "Play it again." Confident, Gordon tapped the screen. The same jagged phrases spilled out, clipped and venomous. "Cops are all corrupt. No respect from the law." Raymond waited until the last word died. Then he spoke, his voice steady as stone. "That recording is a fabrication, spliced together from separate remarks taken out of context." Gordon laughed lightly, appealing to the jury of the gallery. "A convenient claim, Your Honor, but without proof, merely words." Raymond's gaze slid toward Rivera. "Ms. Rivera, would you please retrieve Exhibit 12 from the clerk's desk?" Confused, Rivera moved quickly. A USB drive, pre-filed days ago, clicked into the laptop at the bench. Raymond nodded to the bailiff. "Play the file." The speakers filled again, this time with a full lecture recording from years earlier. A community forum on constitutional rights. The same voice, Raymond's, but smooth, measured. There are officers who forget their oath, and when they do, the system must hold them accountable. But never forget, not every officer is corrupt. Justice is not about painting with one brush, it's about truth. The continuity was undeniable. The exact phrases Gordon had spliced into Venom now flowed naturally in context, revealing their real meaning. Not hatred, but a call for fairness. A hush fell. The difference was devastating. The trap had been sprung, and reversed. Raymond turned his gaze back to Gordon, his eyes hard. Half-truths are lies, and lies have no place in this courtroom. The gallery erupted in murmurs, some clapping before the bailiff barked for silence. Blake slammed his fist against the table. This is ridiculous. But even his outburst rang hollow. Donovan sank deeper into his chair, his conflict visible to all. Gordon tried to recover, voice strained now. Even if context alters the meaning, the sentiment remains. No, Raymond cut in, his tone final. The sentiment is clear. Justice demands scrutiny of all, including those who wear the badge. That is not bias, that is law. The blow landed. Green leaned forward, whispering furiously to Gordon, but the damage was irreversible. The so-called smoking gun had backfired, and now the defense looked desperate, flailing. Rivera seized the momentum. "Your Honor, this attempt to mislead the court only strengthens our case. If they must rely on doctored evidence, what does that say about the truth of their position?" The gallery buzzed again, louder, feeding on the energy shift. Reporters already drafted headlines in their minds. Defense caught using fake recording. Raymond lifted his gavel, striking once for silence. His words cut through the noise. "This court will not tolerate manipulation. The fabricated recording is stricken from the record. Any further attempts of this nature will result in sanctions." The room fell quiet. Gordon sat stiff, his composure shattered. Blake cursed under his breath, realizing their safety net had snapped. Donovan pressed his palms together, his doubt deepening into dread. Raymond leaned forward slightly, eyes sweeping the room. This court is not a stage for lies. It is a place where truth is revealed, no matter how uncomfortable. For a long beat, no one spoke, and then, slowly, the balance in the room shifted. The officers no longer looked untouchable. The defense no longer looked invincible. The system itself was now on trial, and Raymond Carter had just proven he could not be cornered. When court reconvened that afternoon, something had changed at the defense table. Blake sat rigid, jaw clenched, his glare burning holes through the wood. But beside him, Donovan looked broken. His tie loosened, sweat darkening his collar, his hands trembling against folded papers. Before Green could speak, Donovan stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice unsteady. I need to request a sidebar. Privately, away from the gallery." The room buzzed instantly. Green yanked at his sleeve. "Sit down. Don't say a word without me." But Donovan pulled his arm free. "I'm not sitting down. Not anymore." Raymond studied him for a long moment, then nodded to the bailiff. The jury was escorted out. The gallery emptied under protest, reporters shouting as the doors closed. Only the essential parties remained. Donovan's voice cracked as he began. "I can't carry this anymore. Last night when we brought Mr. Carter in, I knew it was wrong. I knew it. But it's not just about me and Blake. There's more." Blake slammed a fist on the table. "Donovan, shut up." Raymond's gavel struck once. "He will speak." Donovan's eyes darted to the bench, desperation plain. "Your Honor, the orders came from higher up. Judge Sanderson. He told us years ago, keep numbers high, keep certain neighborhoods under pressure, and if complaints came, he'd bury them. He promised protection as long as we delivered. The words landed like gunfire. Green dropped his pen. Blake's face went pale. Donovan pressed on. That night when we arrested Benson, it was the same playbook. Stop, search, escalate. Blake pushed harder and I went along. And when Carter showed up at that bus stop, we thought he was nobody. But Sanderson already warned us. Never back down, never admit fault. He said if we ever cracked, we'd be the ones thrown away. Raymond leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You are placing Judge Sanderson at the center of this pattern? Yes, Donovan whispered. He used us. We were his shield. And if I don't say it now, I'll lose more than my badge. I'll lose my family. Blake shot to his feet, shouting, Lies! He's lying to save himself. But the outburst sounded desperate, hollow. The silence that followed told everyone the tide had turned. Donovan lowered his head, voice heavy. I'm ready to testify under oath, in closed chambers, in public, whatever it takes. But the truth is this. Sanderson built the system that made us what we are. And now it's crumbling. Raymond's gavel struck again, each crack echoing like final judgment. So noted. The court will move forward with this testimony entered into record. The doors reopened, the gallery flooding back in, unaware of the storm just unleashed behind closed walls. But soon they would know. The last missing piece had been revealed. The case was no longer just against two officers. The shadow of Judge Sanderson now loomed over everything, and the system itself stood exposed. The next morning, Courtroom 4B was overflowing. Word had leaked, Donovan's testimony naming Judge Alan Sanderson as the man behind the system. Reporters crowded the aisles, cameras waiting for blood. Raymond entered in silence, robe draped like iron. His voice was calm, but the air trembled. Bring in the witness. Donovan returned, pale but resolute. In his hands was a folder thick with photocopies. He passed it to Rivera, who handed it up. Raymond flipped through quickly. Internal memos, unsigned but traceable to Sanderson's chambers. Quotas disguised as productivity targets. Notes instructing officers to focus on high-yield neighborhoods. Rivera rose. Your Honor, these documents, combined with Officer Donovan's testimony, establish a pattern of misconduct tied directly to Judge Sanderson. Green shot up, shouting, This is baseless slander. No proof ties those notes to my client's superiors. But Rivera was ready. She held up the final page, a signed directive with Sanderson's initials. The courtroom gasped. Blake buried his face in his hands. Donovan closed his eyes, shame and relief washing over him at once. Raymond's voice cut through the chaos. The evidence is clear. Judge Sanderson orchestrated a system that rewarded unlawful stops and concealed misconduct. His influence reaches into this very case. The doors suddenly swung open. Reporters jostled as a group of federal investigators entered, led by a stern-faced marshal. One officer strode to the bench, whispering into Raymond's ear. Raymond nodded. He turned to the court. Be advised, Judge Alan Sanderson is now under federal investigation for corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Effective immediately, he is suspended from the bench. The gallery erupted. Cheers, shouts, disbelief colliding in a wave of noise. Protesters outside could be heard chanting through the walls. At the defense table, Green slumped, his case gutted. Blake snarled at Donovan, spitting words too low to catch. Donovan didn't look back. Raymond raised his gavel, striking for silence. Order! This court will proceed. His eyes swept the room. The fall of one man does not erase the harm already done, but it begins to expose the rot. Justice will continue, here, now, and in the open. For the first time, the courtroom felt larger than its walls. Sanderson's shadow, once untouchable, had cracked under the weight of truth. And though the trial of Blake and Donovan was not yet over, everyone in that room knew the tide had shifted. The system itself was on trial, and its mask had just been ripped away. The final day arrived. Courtroom 4B was standing room only, the air charged with anticipation. Reporters packed the aisles, activists filled the benches, and outside, chants from the plaza rumbled like distant thunder. "All rise." Raymond Carter entered, his black robe flowing, his face carved with calm resolve. He sat, lifted the gavel, and struck once. The sound cracked like lightning. "This court will now deliver its judgment." Every eye turned to him. Blake sat rigid, jaw tight, defiance still clinging like armor. Donovan looked hollow, his confession having burned away whatever shield he once had. Raymond's gaze swept the room. The evidence presented has been clear and consistent. Officers Blake and Donovan engaged in unlawful stops, excessive force, and falsification of records. Their conduct violated not only the Constitution, but the oath they swore to uphold. He paused, letting the words sink deep. Therefore, this court rules. Officers Blake and Donovan are to be immediately suspended without pay, pending criminal prosecution for civil rights violations, assault under color of law, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Gasps rippled. Blake's face flushed red. He slammed his fist on the table. "This is a witch hunt." Raymond's gavel came down hard. "Order! This is not a witch hunt. It is accountability. The law applies to all, uniform or not." Donovan closed his eyes. Silent tears streaked down his face. He didn't protest. Raymond continued, voice unwavering. "The Abington Township Police Department, having permitted such conduct to fester under the direction of Judge Alan Sanderson and others, will undergo mandatory restructuring. Effective immediately, an independent auditor will oversee disciplinary procedures, training, and community relations." The gallery erupted into cheers, quickly silenced by the bailiff. Raymond pressed on. "To ensure sustained oversight, this court orders the establishment of a permanent community review board. Its members will be drawn from the public, students, advocates, local leaders, to monitor police practices and report findings directly to the district court." His eyes moved to the gallery, landing on two young women seated together. Ms. Amira Carter and Ms. Lena Morales have agreed to serve as founding members. The crowd erupted again, louder this time, uncontainable. Amira's face flushed with shock, Lena's with fierce pride. The chant outside, "He stands! He stands!" now seemed to echo inside the very walls. Raymond lifted his gavel but did not strike. Instead, he turned to the plaintiff's table. "As for Mr. Tarek Benson, the unlawful stop, detention, and humiliation he suffered were not only violations of his rights but scars carried into his daily life. This court awards him damages to be determined in civil proceedings, with immediate compensation for the harm already inflicted." Tariq's hands flew to his mouth. His mother wept openly in the back row. Rivera gripped his shoulder, whispering, "You did it." Blake jumped to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at Donovan. "This is your fault. You broke." Donovan stood slowly, meeting his partner's fury with quiet defeat. "No, Blake, I finally told the truth." The gallery roared, half in shock, half in vindication. The bailiff called for order, but the energy was unstoppable. Raymond's voice rose above it all. "Justice is not vengeance. It is not silence. It is light cast into shadows. Today, that light reaches further than two officers. It reaches a department, a courthouse, a system." He let the words linger, heavy as stone. Then, with deliberate force, he struck the gavel one final time. "This court is adjourned." The room exploded. Reporters surged toward the doors. Protesters outside erupted into thunderous cheers. Students lifted their signs higher, chanting the new refrain, "Justice stands. Justice stands." Amira hugged her father tightly at the bench. "You did it," she whispered, tears streaming. Raymond shook his head softly. "We did it. All of us." His eyes flicked to Lena. to Malik standing near the door, to Tariq wiping his face. This is only the beginning. Outside, the storm of voices rose, louder than ever, not of anger but of defiance, hope, and solidarity. The system had cracked, its rot exposed, and though the fight would continue, today was proof that truth could rise, even from the most invisible of places. Raymond Carter, once dismissed as a janitor, once broken by betrayal, now stood as the man who had brought the gavel down on an empire of lies. 6 months later, the city felt different. The courthouse reforms were underway, the Community Review Board met weekly, and police uniforms no longer carried the same untouchable shield. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but something had shifted, like a door cracked open to let in light. On an early spring morning, Raymond Carter stood once again at the bus stop where everything had begun. The same cracked pavement, the same battered bench, but now the air carried no weight of humiliation. He held a paper bag with a loaf of bread, just like that night. This time, he wasn't waiting in silence. He was remembering how far the road had stretched since then. A familiar voice called out, "Morning, Judge Carter." Raymond turned. Officer Malik Turner stood there, no longer the timid rookie who spilled coffee in fear. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes brighter. He wore the uniform differently now, not as armor, but as service. "Morning, Malik," Raymond replied with a small nod. "You don't know how much it means," Malik said quietly, "to call you judge without whispering, to say it out loud and mean it." Raymond smiled faintly. "Titles don't matter. What you do with them does." Malik looked across the street, where a young black teenager had dropped his backpack. Another patrol officer, barely out of academy training, helped him pick it up, patting his shoulder in reassurance before sending him on his way. The boy grinned, relief plain on his face. Raymond's gaze lingered on the sight, his chest tightening. That simple act, so ordinary, so human, was once unthinkable in this city. Now it was happening in broad daylight, under the same badge that had once been twisted into a weapon. "Things are changing," Malik said, almost to himself. "They are," Raymond answered softly, "because people chose to stop being silent." Footsteps echoed behind them. Amira appeared, her backpack covered in buttons and slogans, Lena beside her with a camera slung around her neck. They were leaders now, faces of a growing student coalition that had spread across campuses statewide. "Dad," Amira said, her tone half proud, half teasing. "We're headed to the board meeting. Thought we'd drag you along for once." Lena grinned. "Public accountability doesn't rest, Judge." Raymond chuckled under his breath. "You two have louder voices than I ever did." "That's the point," Amira shot back. "You showed us how to stand. Now we keep walking." For a moment he looked at them. His daughter, fierce and unyielding, and Lena, tireless in her pursuit of truth. The torch had passed, not in speeches or ceremony but in footsteps and determination. The bus rumbled in the distance, the same sound that had once framed his humiliation. Now it was just a bus, another part of an ordinary morning. Raymond glanced once more at the patrol officer across the street. The image fixed itself in his mind. A young cop kneeling slightly to meet a teenager's eyes, not with suspicion, but with care. It was small, almost invisible to the world rushing by, but to Raymond it was, the clearest symbol that justice had begun to change. He breathed deeply, the spring air cool and alive. "Justice," he said quietly, "isn't the robe. It isn't the gavel. It's how we treat the invisible." The words settled like a benediction, not just to those beside him, but to everyone who would hear this story in years to come. Before we part ways, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching this story unfold? Maybe it's a quiet morning as you sip your first coffee, or maybe it's a late night when stories like this remind you that justice can rise from the most unexpected places. Share it with us in the comments. We read them all with gratitude. And if this journey moved you, consider subscribing. Not just for more stories, but to stand with a community that still believes in dignity, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending this time with us. Wherever you are, may you carry this story forward, like a spark, like a reminder that change is possible. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens or robes. Sometimes it waits quietly, at a bus stop, in an open hand, in the way we choose to see those the world overlooks, until we're ready to act with compassion. Take care, and we'll meet again in the next story.